The boy's mouth opened wide enough to unhinge his jaw, revealing rows of needle-like teeth coated in a thick, oily sludge that smelled of rotting fish and industrial chemicals. I was standing just 3 feet away when it happened, my hand still gripped around the strap of my leather bag. The child, if you could even call him that, wasn't breathing. He wasn't moving. He was just hanging there in the grayish water of the Pasig River, his skin the color of a drowned corpse, before he suddenly twisted his head toward me and let out a sound that wasn't a scream, but a wet, gurgling hiss. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I turned and ran until my lungs burned and my boots skidded on the slick mud of the embankment. You have to understand why I was there in the first place. My name is Alina, and I work for the local district office as a social worker. My job involves dealing with the forgotten parts of our city. That usually means going into the slums that hug the riverbanks, where the water is a toxic soup of chemicals and waste. I go there to check on the kids, to make sure they aren't being exploited by local gangs or falling victim to the diseases that thrive in the filth. I had received several reports over the last month from a group of neighborhood children. They were terrified. They wouldn't talk much at first because they were afraid of being punished for imagining things. But eventually, they told me about the white boy. They said he appeared every night just as the sun started to dip behind the warehouses. They described him as a small boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with hair like pale straw and eyes that looked like clouded glass. He would sit on the edge of the pier or stand waist-deep in the murky water, calling out to them. He'd ask them to come see something he found under the surface. He told them it was a treasure, or sometimes just a pretty shell. The kids who listened didn't come back. They just vanished into the reeds, and their names were crossed off the neighborhood registry by the next morning. I thought it was a prank, or maybe some local teenagers trying to scare the little ones away from the dangerous water. I told myself that a ghost wasn't something my agency dealt with. We dealt with reality. But when those reports started piling up, 3 children gone in 3 weeks, the reality became much grimmer. I arrived at the settlement on a Tuesday. The smell hit me first. It wasn't just the usual stench of sewage. It was heavy, metallic, and sharp enough to make my eyes water. The industrial zone nearby had been dumping waste into the Pasig for decades, and the river had become a graveyard of chemicals. The children were huddled together near a cluster of shanties made of corrugated iron. They didn't want to look toward the water. "Is it there?" One little girl asked me, her voice trembling. She was holding a tattered doll. I told her I wouldn't know unless she told me. "It comes out at dusk," the girl whispered. "He looks like my cousin, but he doesn't have eyes. He just has holes where his eyes should be." I sat with them for an hour, trying to document their fears on the safety risks of the area. I kept my eyes on the water's edge, watching the shadows lengthen. The locals called it a malevolent child spirit. They knew the old stories, the spirit of a child that never died, a thing that hungered for life. But they whispered that something had changed about this one. They said the river gave it power. They said the chemicals made it hungrier, faster, and more distorted. As the sun began to sink, casting a sickly orange glow over the gray water, I saw movement. A small figure emerged from a cluster of overgrown reeds near the pier. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. It was the boy. He looked exactly as they described, small, pale, and hauntingly still. He stood at the water's edge, his back to us. I should have stayed in my office. I should have called for backup from the local police precinct. Instead, I felt a compelling urge toward the truth of it. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Are you lost?" The figure stopped. It didn't turn around immediately. It swayed slightly, as if struggling to maintain its balance against a wind that wasn't there. Then it began to walk toward us. Every step it took in the mud left a trail of blackish slime. "I found something," the boy said. His voice didn't sound like a child's. It sounded like several voices layered over each other, a girl's high whine, a man's low growl, and the wet bubbling of air through water. "Come see." The children scrambled backward, some falling into the dirt. I stayed put. I had to know. As he got closer, I noticed his skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent in places. I could see something moving underneath the surface of his skin, thin, dark veins that pulsed with a faint green glow. It wasn't biology as I understood it. He was something warped by the toxins in the water, a mutation of a spirit into a parasite. He stopped about 10 feet away from me. He turned his head. The face was almost beautiful if you didn't look too closely. But when he smiled, I saw it. The way his jaw unhinged just enough to reveal those needle teeth, and the way the skin around his mouth tore slightly as he spoke. Naku, a man from one of the shanties shouted from behind me. Huwag Kang Lumakit, get away from her. The boy's head snapped toward the man's voice. His eyes, the glass-like spheres, suddenly flared with that same green light. He didn't move like a human. He lunged. He moved with a speed that was impossible for his size, his limbs lengthening and elongating as he crossed the distance in a heartbeat. He didn't go for the man. He flew toward me. I felt his hands grab my arms. His grip wasn't warm, like grabbing frozen meat wrapped in oily leather. The smell hit me again, the rot of the river, concentrated and overwhelming. Help! I tried to scream, but the air in my lungs seemed to thicken into a sludge of silt and chemical fumes. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I could see the individual hairs on his head, each one coated in a greasy film. He wasn't just trying to scare me, he was feeding. I could feel a strange, draining sensation pulling at my very core, as if he were sucking the heat and vitality straight out of my veins through my skin. The ground beneath us shook slightly. The water behind him began to churn violently, bubbling up like boiling oil. From the depths of the Pasig, other shapes seemed to rise, not people, but shadows that moved with the same jagged, jerky motions as the boy. They were the others who hadn't been lucky enough to be found, or perhaps they were just parts of him, manifestations of the river's hunger. I fought back, my fingers clawing at his wrists. I felt a piece of his skin tear under my nails. Instead of blood, a thick, blackish fluid oozed out. It hissed when he hit the ground, and where it touched the grass, the blades turned black and withered instantly. He let out a trilla, high-pitched, melodic sound that vibrated in my teeth. "Please," I gasped, the word barely a whisper. The boy's face distorted even further. His nose seemed to melt away, merging with his upper lip. He wasn't just a spirit. He was a byproduct of an environment that had forgotten how to be pure. The chemicals had fused his essence with the waste, creating something that didn't want to harm the river. It wanted to consume everything that touched it. The man from the shack ran toward us, waving a heavy iron pipe. "Get away from her," he roared again. The boy let go of me and turned toward the man. He didn't run, he leapt into the air, his body twisting in midair like a piece of scrap metal being tossed by a machine. He landed on the man's chest, and the sound that followed was sickening, a wet thud followed by the sound of bone cracking. The man didn't even have time to scream. The boy's jaw opened again, and I saw the dark plume of something he pulled from the man's throat. It wasn't a physical object. It was a wisp of gray mist that the boy inhaled greedily. He seemed to grow larger, his limbs thickening, his skin becoming less translucent and more solid as he fed. As scrambled backward, tripping over a pile of debris, I didn't look at the man. I couldn't. I just crawled away, my hands scraping against the jagged rocks and oily mud. The children were gone. They had fled into the interior of the slum, their cries echoing in the distance. I made it to my car, a battered sedan that felt like a sanctuary against the night. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, shaking, listening to the sounds coming from the riverbank. The boy was gone too. I waited until the sun had completely vanished, and the only light came from the flickering orange glow of some nearby fires. When I finally dared to look back, the area where the man had been was silent. There were no signs of a struggle, just a limp body lying in the mud, looking as if he had simply fallen asleep while his face was twisted in a frozen mask of shock. I drove home in a daze. I didn't report what I saw. I couldn't explain it to my superiors. How do you tell your boss that you saw a mutated spirit child feeding on the life force of a neighbor because of industrial waste? They would call it a hallucination, or they'd say I had finally cracked under the stress of the job. But I knew what I saw. Every night since then, I have tried to stay away from the water. But sometimes, when I am in my apartment and the city is quiet, I can still smell it, that heavy, metallic rot of the Pasig. And sometimes, when I rig out my window toward the distant horizon where the industrial zones glow like dying embers, I see a flicker of green light. It isn't just one boy anymore. The reports from the social office have changed. They aren't talking about one missing child. They are reporting entire groups of people delivery drivers, stray residents, even a few workers from the nearby factories who seem to have walked into the water and never come out. The stories are becoming more common. People say they see children playing on the banks at night. They say the children look like toys, but their voices sound like many people speaking at once. I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the air, that the boy wasn't just hunting for food anymore. He was multiplying. The river was producing more of them, each one stronger and larger than the last, fueled by the very toxins that were poisoning our land. They weren't just spirits of the water, they were the offspring of the waste. Last night, I found a note tucked under my door. It wasn't a letter with an address or a name. It was just a single piece of paper with a drawing on it. It was a crude sketch of a small boy standing by a river, holding out a hand. Underneath the drawing, in shaky, childish handwriting that looked like it had been written with something darker than ink, were 3 words: "Come see mine." I haven't opened my front door since I found it. I sit in my living room, and every time the wind blows from the direction of the river, I hear a faint, wet giggle coming from the hallway. I can hear the soft, rhythmic thud of small feet on the floorboards outside my door, moving slowly, deliberately. I keep my eyes closed, but I can hear the sound of something heavy and wet dragging itself along the wood just outside my room. It stops right in front of the door. The silence that follows is absolute until it speaks again. It doesn't use a voice this time. It's just a vibration in the air, a thought pushed into my mind like a needle. Huwad Kang Madakot. Don't be afraid. I can hear him breathing now, a wet, bubbling sound, as if he's trying to breathe through a throat full of silt. He's waiting for me to open the door. He isn't in a hurry anymore. He knows I'm inside. He knows I can hear him. The scariest part isn't that he might come in. It's the fact that when I listen closely enough, I can hear his voice changing again, shifting from the boy's whine to my own voice, perfectly mimicking my tone, as if he's practicing how to lure me out into the dark. I sit on my sofa, clutching a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other, watching the shadow of the door handle begin to turn, just a fraction of an inch at a time. If you ever find yourself near the river at dusk, and you hear a child calling your name from the reeds, don't look toward the water. Don't listen to what they found. Some things in the water aren't looking for treasures. They're just looking for something that still has a heartbeat to replace their own. I can see the shadow move now, a small hand reaching through the gap in the doorframe, its fingers long and pale as bone, dripping a dark, shimmering liquid onto my carpet. Do you hear that? That soft, wet clicking sound coming from just outside the wood. It's not a child's laugh anymore. It sounds like something hungry trying to remember how to be human. And I wonder, when it finally gets inside, whose face will it wear next?